friends, and welcome back to my channel. Most houseplant parents know about soil, but do you really know what goes in it and why? Do you know why bark goes in some soils and sand goes in others? Do you know how to store it properly? Do you know whether or not you can reuse it? These are some of the things I'm going to be talking about today in my video all about soil. If you are new here and you don't know me already, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet, so if you want to follow along with my planty journey and learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my channel, and subscribe to my videos. Watch some more of my videos and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new here, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. Right, let's talk about soil. So a base mix is the kind of foundation of your soil, and you can get away with using a base mix on its own. It will provide the sort of general needs of most plants, but it's not really going to give them their specific wants, and it's going to make it a little bit harder for you to care for them. You can get a base mix or a general houseplant potting mix from general garden centers, DIY shops, big hardware stores. You can get it from small independent businesses and smaller plant shops, or companies like Soil Ninja, who's actually the sponsor of this video, who I'll talk about a little bit later down the line. You can also make a base mix for yourself, which is what I started doing fairly early on in my houseplant career, because I found it a lot cheaper than buying like houseplant soil from somebody else, and I could be a bit more exact with it how I wanted it to be. So let's make some. My base mix consists of 50% coco coir, 25% worm castings, and 25% perlite. Together, these three things make up what your general houseplants will need. Coco coir acts like sort of the base of the base mix. It's a replacement for peat moss, which is a non-renewable resource and is actually really bad for the environment. Whereas coco coir is renewable and versatile, and it has a neutral pH, and it holds plenty of moisture, retains a lot of water. It also takes a really long time to break down, so you're not gonna have to worry about your houseplant soil decomposing over time in your home. Worm castings, which is basically a nice name for worm poop, is filled with macro and micronutrients that naturally fertilizes your soil. It continues to generate because it's filled with things like baby worms, isopods, arthropods, as well as beneficial bacteria, microorganisms, and fungi that just continue to process the soil and keep it nice and fertile for your plant. Perlite is a sort of popcorned volcanic rock. It is puffed up, so there's loads of air channels within it. It is very, very, very porous, so it can wick water throughout your plant. It increases drainage and soil aeration, but it does also hold and store nutrients as you fertilize the soil. And you should always, always, always wet it before using it, or wear a mask, or deal with it outside, because you do not want to be breathing in the dust of perlite, because it is essentially tiny, tiny little shards of glass. So it can be really, really harmful, so be very, very careful when you're handling your perlite. I know that I am not the best for this, and I have used perlite without any of these things before, but I do try and do my best to not breathe in the perlite dust, because it is seriously bad for you. So once you've mixed it all up, you can just use these three ingredients on their own, and a lot of plants will be okay, but you have to be really, really good at watering if you don't want to add anything else to the soil. Adding other components is going to help the soil retain more moisture or wick it away faster in order to give specific plants more what they need in terms of watering. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to chat about Soil Ninja, this video's sponsor. Soil Ninja is 1000% my favorite soil company ever. I bang on about them constantly because I absolutely love their stuff. And I'm so glad to be working with them on this video to share information about soil with you. They create premium bioactive houseplant soil promoting plants' health and longevity. Their specialist formulas and component collections are a must-have for absolutely every plant parent. Honestly, before I knew about Soil Ninja, before Soil Ninja existed, I would get random different components from different places, Amazon, probably quite unethical places in some cases, but I needed the components. Once Soil Ninja came along and I realized that they did all of the components in one place and ethically sourced all of them, I was like, abso-freaking-lutely, sign me up. and their packaging is fantastic. It is made from recycled plastic and it is recyclable itself as well. And all of their bags are resealable, so it makes storage very, very easy. Some of you may already know that I am an affiliate of Soil Ninja, meaning that I have an ongoing code with them that you can use anytime to get a discount on your houseplant soil blends and components. So use the link in the description below to get 10% off any sort of components and blends that they have. Thank you so much, Soil Ninja, for sponsoring this video. There are several different components you can add to your base mix to give the soil different benefits for different plants. So let's go through some of the main ones. This is pumice. It is also an expanded volcanic rock, kind of like perlite, but it is a denser form of it, so it doesn't have quite as much air within it. But it can be used as a replacement to perlite, and because it is denser and heavier than perlite, it's not going to rise to the top of the soil, which perlite can do as you're watering it. Perlite floats, pumice doesn't. Pumice is also porous and can hold minerals and nutrients from the water while providing drainage and aeration for your soils. Pumice can be added to the soil of pretty much any houseplant to add that extra aeration and drainage. Soil Ninja has two different sizes of pumice. Both work equally the same, they both work equally as well, but the chunky or coarse pumice is better for plants with bigger, chunkier, thicker roots like monsteras or anthuriums, whereas the fine pumice is better for things with smaller roots like calatheas, marantas, hoyas, and things like that. Orchid bark has a high surface area for roots to attach to, and the surface is great for holding positive microbes. It also dramatically increases drainage. If you have orchid bark in your soil and you're watering it, the water kind of streams past it because it doesn't absorb the water as fast as something like cocoa coir would. So it provides really, really, really great drainage. I personally use a lot of orchid bark in my soil. That's why I have a big bag of bark from Soil Ninja. And I use this on my plants with moss poles. I add it to their soil mixes, whatever they may be, because it does provide that extra drainage, and because I'm watering moss poles more frequently, it really allows the soil to drain fast enough and not retain as much water, so I'm not overwatering the plant because I'm watering the moss pole more often than I would the soil. When someone says chunky soil, they're often referring to the bark within it and it having a lot of bark. It is really great for thick roots to grab onto, but also provides a good amount of aeration in the soil as there's just gaps in the soil. It is really great for plants like epiphytes, aka anthuriums, hoyas, orchids, ferns, and jungle cacti, as well as monsteras and philodendrons. They absolutely love orchid bark in their soil. Sand is another really common component that goes into a lot of soils. It is a micro aggregate because it's literally tiny and it absorbs very little water, so it is great for drainage. It provides like tiny little micro pathways for the water to go down through the soil. It is also really great for plants with fine roots because it reduces soil clumping, so when you're repotting, it stops the soil from sticking to the roots as much as it would without the sand. You'll often find sand within like store-bought cacti and succulent mixes because it is great for cacti and succulents. Both jungle cacti and desert cacti like to have a bit of sand in their soil, as well as ficuses and ferns. Activated charcoal is another component that you could put in pretty much any soil mix for any houseplant. It actually removes toxins and bad microorganisms from your soil by trapping them in its little porous bits and not letting them go, keeping your soil nice and clean and avoiding things like root rot, which it won't completely protect your plant from root rot, but it'll help a little bit. And because it doesn't really absorb water, it also really helps with drainage. If you ever see little flecks in your soil that look like little bits of gold, it's probably vermiculite. Vermiculite is very, very, very lightweight, but it is hydrophilic, meaning that it loves water and can absorb a lot of it. So when vermiculite comes in contact with water, it will absorb it and slowly expand in sort of an accordion type motion. You can tell by looking at it that that's how it grows, and it'll slowly re-release that water over time, thus shrinking. And that sort of movement in the soil creates air pockets, which are really, really good to help your roots have more air, which they do actually need in order for your plant to continue growing. Vermiculite is really great for your moisture-loving plants, so it's good to put in soils for calatheas, marantas, and alocasias. This is grit, one of the heavier components you can add to your soil. It acts as a drainage component because the rocks are not porous, and it allows the water to go through your soil faster. Grit is really important for xeric plants, such as desert cacti, some of which, when they get dehydrated, they actually retract down into the substrate a little bit, and they can only do that with this sort of heavy component in there because the roots pull down, allowing the cacti to go lower to the ground, kind of shielding it from the harsh sun that could cause it to further dehydrate. You can also use it as a pot topper, so on top of any sort of houseplant soil for any plant, as a way to prevent fungus gnats. I personally haven't tried it, but it's something you can do. And then last up we have zeolite, which some of you might not have heard of at all. It is a fairly new component. It is a porous mineral aggregate that you can basically use instead of pumice or like perlite in your soils, and it does look really cool because it changes color when it gets wet, which I think is very fun. But it basically stores nutrients that come into contact with it because it is slightly porous, and it has a really high cation exchange capacity, or CEC, which you can read up more about on the Soil Ninja website. I can link a blog post below about that, but it is a very beneficial thing that peat moss has, which, since we're trying not to use peat moss, having something like zeolite in your soil can up your CEC in your soil and allow it to better hold and release nutrients, keeping your plants healthier for longer. Zeolite is pretty much fine in any houseplant soil as well, just like pumice, and you can get it again in coarse or fine, depending on your plant's roots and the size of them and what they need. So you can just take your base mix and add in the different components depending on what you need for different plants. Soil Ninja actually has a really good chart of the different ratios you would want for different types of plants and what components you would add in after the base mix. Or what I find the easier way to do is just buy their pre-mixed mixes. Soil Ninja have a ton of different blends for different types of plants, and they actually have a plant index as well, so even if they don't have a specific blend for the specific plant, like for instance Hoya, they don't have a Hoya blend, but on this plant index you can go see that Hoyas will do fine in their Anthurium mix. The Monstera and Philodendron mix is honestly my favorite. It contains activated charcoal, zeolite, pumice, worm castings, cocoa guar bark, and perlite. So a really good mix in there. It is fairly chunky, which a lot of my aeroids like, and it just works as a good general houseplant soil for me and my collection, which is pretty tropical, aeroidy kind of things. If you have a lot of houseplants like me, you probably have a lot of different soil blends, components, bits and bobs here and there, and there's no right way to store them, but there are some things you can do to store them better and make them last longer. I personally like to seal up my soil mixes and blends because I have a fungus gnat issue, and any sort of open soil they can go into and lay eggs in, which I prefer to not infest my entire collection with fungus gnats, even though it might already be, but you know, we can figure that out another time. So sealing it is the best way to do it. Luckily, Soil Ninja bags themselves are resealable, so I don't need to worry about storing like their pre-mixed blends or even their components, which come in smaller bags. This is a 10-liter bag, and I can use it for ages because it is resealable and I don't need to worry about fungus gnats getting in or any sort of other issues causing the soil to deteriorate. If you have just made some base mix and you want to store this, I would personally seal this as well. You can do so in glass jars, plastic totes. I have a really useful box that I have sealed so nothing can get in or out of it, and I can put this mix in there and just reuse it as and when I need. But it is really important that when you are sealing off soil and organic components like this, that they are dry. If you're sealing up wet soil, it will cause the soil to slowly break down, and if you open that up again down the line a few months, 6 months later, that soil will probably reek because it's just been essentially decomposing over that entire amount of time. So I definitely suggest you seal it up with it being dry or very, very slightly damp, and that's not going to be an issue. And when you're ready to use it down the line, you can just rehydrate it and you're ready to go. Also, you want to make sure you're storing it in a cool, dark space. You don't want like the sun to be just like beating down on your soil all day, because that can also cause it to start to break down and decay and smell. So try and keep it in a cool, dark location if you possibly can. I personally keep mine on my plant shelves. For the most part, I keep them in their Soil Ninja bags. That works really, really well for me because it's easily accessible, but I'm not worried about things getting into it. It doesn't really get much, if any, direct light, so I'm not worried about that. And to be honest, when you have a whole bunch of Soil Ninja bags lined up, I think it looks really, really sleek because their design is like really, really minimal and black, and it personally goes with my home aesthetic, so I'm not too worried about my Soil Ninja bags being on show. For components that aren't organic, I like to put them in small containers. You can use glass jars like these that I got off of Amazon, but I highly recommend, if you can, recycling glass jars that you have in your home, like large pasta sauce jars or pickle jars or things like that, because it's just as easy. Why not? You don't need to pay for something like this. But I had these for spices anyway, so like, why not just put my components in them instead? And they look cute because I've made the little labels with what they are on them, so I really like that. The last thing I want to talk about is reusing soil. It is better to reuse soil where you can. If your plant that you've taken it off of is healthy and pest-free, definitely you can for sure use your soil from that plant, but I would still suggest sterilizing it if possible. The first thing you want to do is remove old plant matter, like any roots that have broken off or are dead in there, or any sort of dead leaves that have dried up and fallen into the soil, because those things will just rot. So take those out and avoid the whole rot situation. And then you can sterilize it by steaming it, putting it in the oven or microwave. I'm not going to go into details on how exactly to do that. If you want to know, you can Google it, but do be careful because those things are hot. So yeah. After you've sterilized it, you want to fluff it up, make sure that there are no clumps in it that could be holding anything. It'll make your soil a bit more even as well, and then you can re-add more nutrients. After about 6 months or so, the worm castings in your soil or any sort of slow release fertilizer or fertilizers that you've had in it will probably be null at that point, so adding a bit more worm castings or a slow release fertilizer in there can help the next plant you're going to use it have plenty of nutrients to like get going. I typically don't reuse my soil, which I know isn't great. If I'm repotting a plant from one pot size to a bigger one and it is a happy and healthy plant without any pests or fungus issues or anything like that, I will reuse that soil then, but I typically don't store reused soil. I know I probably should, but with the sort of fungus gnat issue I have, I don't really fancy giving other plants fungus gnats. I know once you've sterilized it, it gets rid of those, but to be honest, I'm a bit lazy, which I know isn't great, but here we are. I tend to not reuse my soil, and I'm sorry about it. So that is it. That is my soil 101, the very basics on what you need to know in order to keep your plants happy and healthy by mixing up your own soils. I really, really hope you enjoyed this video. Before I leave, I want to say a big thank you to the sponsor of this video, Soil Ninja. And then lastly, a very big thank you to you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below and comment on other houseplanty things you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. Thank you so, so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!